Welcome to, I don't even know where to go with this. It's been so long. Welcome to another edition. Welcome to the first edition of Everyone Hate. I don't know. Welcome to Everyone Hates Cleveland. We're back. I'm back. Gage Will is with me tonight. It's been Gage for us. I don't think we've podcasted this year since the season has started. Am I right?
I think you're right. I don't know if we've done anything in the calendar year of 2018, actually.
Yeah,
but
I think maybe we did a couple of during the playoffs last year, right before the playoffs last year. But other than that, we haven't really done much. EHC has been pretty dead on arrival for the past few weeks, but for a few months. But we decided to fire it up again. I don't know if it's going to be regular. This could be the last time we podcast until 2019. I don't know. But Gage and I have been trying to get on air for the past few days. So here we are. I think it was the Brad Hand, Adam Cimber deal that kind of spurred us on in the trade deadline overall. Obviously we talk a ton off air about the Indians, but let's just kick things off with Brad Hand and Adam Cimber. Obviously, the Indians' big need since October was whenever they decided not to bring back Shaw, bring back Smith. The Indians have been really shorthanded with. I guess the best way to say this, Gage, they've been shorthanded with regards to surefire pen arms. They had some interesting lottery tickets to kind of throw out there, but all of those lottery tickets got shredded at one point or another. Obviously, the Brad Hand deal, Cimber deal had to be done. I hate to say this, and the Indians have been doing quite a bit since the Miller deal in 2016. There really hasn't been, they're active teams. The Indians have been one of the top 4 or 5 active teams on the free agent market, on the trade market, and yet still the Brad Hand deal surprised me. Did it surprise you?
I kind of was gearing up for me. He had to be traded, and you knew Brad Hand was at the top of the list just because of the 3 years of control, which is a whole nother tangent we can go down. But it surprised me in that they moved so quickly. I know it's not going to seem like quickly to a lot of people because we've been waiting to fix this relief problem all year, but it's quick in the aspect of that Miller deal happened on July 31st. And this Hand deal came together a full 2 weeks before the deadline. So I was surprised at the timing of it coming right out. And maybe it's a result of the late All-Star break this year, kind of allowing some more trade discussions to happen, perhaps.
Well, the interesting kind of side note to all this has been, we way back last July, I wrote a piece on them, perhaps bringing in Brad Hand back then. There was speculation that they had been in on him for a while. It turns out they've been talking pretty consistently with the Padres since then about Brad Hand. Apparently they talked over the offseason in spring. But what really surprised me is it seems like they've been in on Cimber as well since spring training. What does it mean to you to bring in many people's estimation, the second best lefty reliever in baseball? Brad Hand has been, over the past 2.5 years, a lot of people call him the Andrew Miller light, and I suppose that's unfair to Hand and maybe even a little unfair to Miller. But if you, for example, watched his appearance last night, he's got that back foot slider that's very, very, very similar. I'm sorry, that was today. That back foot, that back foot slider that's very similar to Andrew Miller's. He also has the backdoor slider that's very similar to Andrew Miller's. I wrote in a piece this week about his approach change. This Andrew Miller deal, just looking at 2018, gives them some interesting matchups. But we have been talking off air. Obviously this year's a big deal, but also a big deal beyond too. You mentioned the 3 years.
Yeah, and I kind of want to get back to, before we jump into the Andrew Miller, Brad Hand stuff, I want to kind of get back to how you touched on their interest in Adam Cimber in spring training.
Yeah. Well, I think, it mentioned Antonetti and Chernoff in 2 separate interviews mentioned how they had been discussing Cimber with San Diego and they couldn't find a match. I think, obviously in the offseason, San Diego, I don't, it's hard to say whatever San Diego's thinking. They went out and they brought in Hosmer, and you always kind of think that maybe they think they're going to be better than they are. I kind of think they entertained the trade, but never went in on it. It's intriguing to me in that obviously the dialogue has continued, and from what Antonetti said, he noted that things really picked up after the draft, which leads me to believe that they've been talking right up until the beginning of June, and then after June they've been talking straight away. I think the biggest piece to me, and you sort of mentioned this, when the Miller deal came up, we heard some rumblings a couple days before. Maybe the Indians were in on Miller. Nothing about Brad Hand other than pure speculation I saw from Heyman that if Brad Hand was available, Cleveland would be in on him.
Which at the time you're just like, well, duh. I mean, you can't you got to take those tweets with a grain of salt when you see those things pop up too, because you can't really diversify the speculation from the actual inside knowledge. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, and obviously the Indians, any reliever that's been talked about, Cleveland's been in on. I mean, there's no way they're missing out on a reliever who's available.
Right. And as you said, there was nothing concrete linking them to Hand really other than what seemed like speculation. And the Cimber thing, I can't get over that they were talking to the Padres about him in spring training. He hadn't pitched Major League inning yet.
Well, and it makes you, it makes you as a, and we follow metrics, and I guess it makes you wonder about this eye-level arm slot thing. Do the Indians actively look for a guy who maybe comes at you in a little bit of a different way? I think the thing that makes Miller so effective, he only uses 2 pitches, but he comes at you from different slots. He throws 3, 4, 5 different ways to throw a slider. You bring Cimber in and you talk about eye level and you got this rising slider. I mean, I think, wouldn't you think that a guy like Cimber, and maybe Cimber was available over spring because they brought in Makita from Japan. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if it's true, and it seems like it might have been true. I mean, obviously the Indians were kind of maybe looking at something that nobody else saw because like you said, Cimber hadn't pitched a game in the bigs.
He had spent 1 year in AAA, and there was nothing about his numbers. I mean, he had really good minor league numbers, don't get me wrong, but there's nothing like K's don't jump off the page at you. His ground ball rate doesn't immediately scream like this guy's going to be locked to be a reliever in the big. So like you said, there must have been something with that arm slot and his ability to command. That's the only thing that jumped out at me when I looked immediately at his minor league numbers. And his major league numbers are better than his minor league numbers. This was never like a top 30 guy in any system. I mean, the only thing that made him unique was this slot. And I think the Padres, it's good to have one of these guys, and the Padres had 2. And this is, they're both pretty good, but you want to have something different. If you're going to have a sidearm pitcher, it's not like you want to have 2 from the same side. So I don't know. And Cimber's looked great with the Indians so far. I don't know. Let's start with Cimber before we hop over to Hand. Hand's kind of the easy topic. I think the first thing that you noted in a conversation with you on Slack was that, you're talking about velocity. This isn't a guy with high velocity. He does, just having watched him, have a tendency sometimes to get a pitch a little flat up in the zone. But having a slider that rises and a sinker that rises, especially when you're comparing him to, say, the other righty at the back end of the bullpen, Cody Allen, I think, the matchups that they can create, especially with Andrew Miller potentially coming back in some form, having a guy like Cimber in that mix could pose potential problems. Do you see the Indians maybe targeting Cimber specifically for maybe the Yankees in the playoffs? Well, that's what I was going to get to. He just seems like your ideal. I think it might have been Mike Hattery, who thoughts are with him taking the bar exam right now, but we should probably, before we get into this, we should probably stop. And Mike's not going to, first of all, Mike, if you listen to this before the end of the day tomorrow, shame the hell on you.
But man, seriously, dude, Gage and I are feeling your pain. Props to you. I know that you're looking forward to about 4:00 tomorrow afternoon for this all to be done. So EHC throwing the big props to Mike Hattery going for the bar exam. All right, sorry, Gage, go ahead. Yankees.
Yeah, I'll send you. Yeah, so getting back to the Yankees, I think it was Hattery that mentioned it initially. Cimber is the ideal guy in that October game to come in and face your Judge and your Stanton in the 5th or 6th inning of a playoff game when it's a 3-3 game, and maybe you get creative or leave him out there to face Gregorius sandwiched in the middle of them and just see what happens. But it does seem like he gives you so many options in the middle innings from the right side because they don't really have that guy that is going to be really super effective on righties.
Yeah, well, and they have that that lefty lineup where they bump Stanton up from 2nd or from 4th to 3rd. And I forget who they have batting cleanup.
It's Didi.
No.
Oh, I know what you're saying. Never mind.
Yeah, so I think they bump Stanton up right by Judge, and I feel like there might be another guy that they pop in there that's a righty who bats cleanup. But in that scenario, it's perfect to bring in a guy like Cimber. Again, you're changing arm angle, and this is a guy who can mess around with the zone and the arm angle on them, especially when they're used to looking at lefties. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that there are certain scenarios with the Yankees that this is really going to pan out for. Should we see the Yankees in either round?
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense because you got Cody Allen on the back end who's going to be a multi-inning, or hopefully he returns to form and finds that 4 or 5 out and play October arm. So you don't want to play matchups with him in the middle innings, at least unless it's a extremely high leverage instance where you really need those outs. But Neil Ramirez isn't a guy who invokes a lot of trust that he can get Stanton and Judge out, even though I'm a big Neil fan. But I think I trust a Cimber type funky arm slot a little bit more in that 5th inning of a 3-3 game against Stanton and Judge.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Neil Ramirez, I mean, you see it, when they brought Brian Shaw in way back in the day after that trade, I mean, the thing that I was always worried about with Shaw is when he didn't have movement. And when he didn't have movement, he was hittable. And I think that with Neil Ramirez, it's not like we're sitting with, multi-years of a body of work here with Neil Ramirez, and you throw this guy into the playoffs in any sort of high leverage situation, you really don't know what you're going to get yet until you see him do it. And while you can say the same thing about Cimber does almost, I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say he's a novelty act, but in today's big league game, it's not like in the 70s and 80s when you had, it seemed like every team had a submarine pitcher coming in at you, the Quisenberries back in the day who came at you from the sidearm. But I think that the nice thing about Cimber is he's kind of an unknown commodity in the American League. The league's only going to get a couple of years look at him, or a couple of months look at him before the playoffs. The Yankees aren't going to get to see him at all. The Red Sox, I think, get to see him for a couple of games, and if they don't use him, maybe not at all. And it's just it's an interesting get as far as Cimber goes. And again, another one of those guys. I think the thing that impressed me the most, like you said, they've been looking at him since spring training, but again, not a guy that's been on the radar. Not a guy that's been on the radar since the start. All right, let's talk quickly about Brad Hand, and then let's get into the stuff that pisses us off.
So Brad Hand is. I just want to get to it. How excited I am to watch this guy man that bullpen through 2021, along with on these Lindor teams. That shores up the biggest worry going forward is finding that one relief option to build off of over that time frame.
Yeah, and and the great thing about Hand, and I actually think you're the one that mentioned this, his cost. We know what we're getting next year. I mean, I think he's at $5 million next year. Maybe it's 5. I think it's $5.5 million next year.
5 or 6 or 7, somewhere in that range.
I think it's 5 next year, 7 the year after, and then a $10 million option. So the Indians actually cut themselves a break and give them an ability to go out and get somebody else to kind of follow him up. I mean, obviously next year, if he's not the closer, that means they brought somebody else in. This year, what's really intriguing with me is kind of what we saw today. What we saw today was he kind of came in. I think he came in with 2 outs, and then it was 2 outs in the 8th. Cimber came in, got the out, and then he came in with 2 outs in the 8th inning. Got whoever was in for Marte, and then they kept him in the 9th because there were 2 lefties to face back to back, and because he's so good, they just left him in to kind of finish up the game today to get the final 3 outs. Well, the final 4 outs. I think the fun thing about about him this year is 2 things. One, obviously, we're looking at another multi-inning guy. I mean, the Padres used him in 2 innings. The scary part of Hand over the next 3 years is he's leading the league in innings for relievers by a big stretch over the past 2.5 years, 213 innings. But I mean, you obviously have at least this year a multi-inning guy in the same vein of Andrew Miller. That's one, and you can match him up when you have a lefty coming up and say the 6th inning or the 7th inning. But it's not just going to be the 6th inning for one guy. You've got a guy who can go multiple innings.
Yeah, you get a guy that can. He's not dominant in the same way against righties, but he can get righties out very effectively.
Yeah, especially with his added movement.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I want to say that I am a bigger fan of this Hand trade than I was the Miller trade at the time. And
what makes it better for you, other than the fact maybe it's because our bullpen sucks so bad.
No, the Miller trade, I was enthralled. Don't get me wrong. That was a dynamite land that propelled them in October. But they gave up 2 of my favorite prospects in the system at the time, Frazier and Justice Sheffield. And look at Justice Sheffield over there right now. He is ready. He is. I mean, if they don't make a move for a starter, he could be in that rotation in October.
Yeah, that's the truth.
But I value the Frazier Sheffield side a little more than Mejia, even though I'm still a fan of Mejia. And then there's an extra year of control on Hand. That's the other thing. You got Andrew Miller for 2 years and 3 months, and now you got Brad Hand for 3 years and 3 months, cheaper than Andrew Miller per year.
And don't forget age. I mean, we got Miller at the age of 31, I believe. Yep. And we're getting Hand at the age of 28. I mean, and what we're seeing, and again, hindsight is everything, but what we're seeing here is, Miller breaking down, and he's 33. It's not like he's old, but, we theoretically get Brad Hand a little more in his prime, and a guy who, after taking a quick look at him, seems to be recreating himself into more of a Miller-like kind of reliever.
And the other aspect is he doesn't have the innings on his arm that Miller did. By virtue of age, and Miller spent how many years as a starter? 7, 6, trying to start?
Yeah, I mean, he's been in the league, 13 years now? Something like that?
Yeah, and I don't think it was until about 2011 or 2012 that he flipped that over into the pen.
Yeah, I don't know. It's been a long time. I think it was it the Orioles that moved him to the pen at first?
I thought it was the Marlins.
Maybe the Marlins did move him into the pen. Gosh, he was in that.
Or no, it was the Red Sox. No, it wasn't. It was the Red Sox.
Marlin was Miller was the. Okay, hold on a second.
He was in the Miggy deal.
He was in the Miggy deal. Oh my gosh, that's right. He was the stud starter that was in the Miggy deal that went over to Florida. That's right. Gosh almighty. Miggy's been with the Tigers forever.
Yeah.
Just looking at this really quickly. Yeah, the Red Sox, he started off in the rotation with the Red Sox in 2011, and then made 5 appearances that year. And then the following year, he was straight out of the pen. So 2012 is when he moved to the pen. And he spent 1, 2.
It took him a couple years to get his bearings.
It took 3 years on and off, maybe 4. 4 years because he jumped from Double-A to the Marlins. So he spent 4 years sporadically in the rotation.
So just getting back to the point, Hand just doesn't have that same mileage on his arms, 3 years younger, and is just in the middle of reinventing himself. So maybe the Indians cashed in on him at the exact right time. And they got a 5 years of control on a wacky submarine guy that can go get them 2 outs on any given night.
Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, he turns into a 1-out guy.
And yeah, and well, that was my thing on him. I'm not extremely high on him because I just think there's a lot of unknowns with Cimber. But why not take that flyer? And as we discussed, there had to be something in the actual scouting that tipped the Indians off to him, because you can comb his Fangraphs and Baseball Reference pages for 4 hours and not find anything that jumps out at you.
So if anybody's listening to this who's in the media, who actually has some discussions with maybe Chris Antonetti, maybe ask him what they saw in Cimber. Maybe ask that question. That would be a good thing. All right, let's back away from this. Great deal for the Indians, but I think this wouldn't be a podcast with you and I if we didn't discuss Yandy Diaz, who just burned an option for his fantastic 4-day stint DHing because he can't apparently play anywhere in the field. I guess. Okay, let's look at this like we're straight men here, just talking about Yandy Diaz without getting pissed. Yandy Diaz plays third base and first base. So Gage, there's nowhere for him to play at the big league level, right?
This is a trick question.
Well, I'm trying. I know it's been a long time, but I tend to rant on these podcasts. I'm trying really hard not to. So I'll volley it to you. I'll let you roll with this first, because at some point I'm going to boil over.
Let me start here. Let me start and wonder. They've tried the outfield thing with Yandy. They've
have they?
Well,
okay,
I'm saying just stick with me for a second.
All right, sorry. I'm sorry.
They've given him the opportunity to play outfield, and I haven't really heard much on that front. I vividly remember disaster in Toronto a couple of years ago when he was up with the big league club. That sticks out in my memory, where he just had like 3 gappers hit right. They were all tweeners. They were tough plays, but he just kind of looked lost out there. And I think that kind of thing sticks with Francona, of all people, more than most. But let's say, for argument's sake, he can't play the outfield. You have Melky Cabrera, Rajai Davis, Michael Brantley, and Tyler Naquin as your most dominant outfielders right now on this big league club. None of them are even average defenders. Calling any one of them an average defender would be exaggerating their defensive abilities. You put Jason Kipnis in center field in a playoff game when he hadn't played it since he was at Arizona State. He is your second baseman right now. Jose Ramirez is at third base, tearing it up over there. I mean, withstanding. But we know that he probably plays second base a little better than third base even. And Yandy Diaz is his most comfortable position, and minor league managers say he can play it pretty well, is over at third base. It seems simple. And Kipnis I've been one of his biggest stands all year. I've been banging the Kipnis drum, maybe a little too much, but I felt like the public opinion had fallen way too far on him. You can slide him out to right field. I know he doesn't have the arm, and platoon the heck out of him with Geyer. And then slide Yandy in at third base and move Jose to second, and all of a sudden your lineup is immensely better.
So
there's an easy avenue for me.
Okay, so let's just get this topic out there. The idea of him playing third base, and I covered him in Carolina during his first year in the big leagues here, coming from Cuba, and every manager I talked to raved about his skills at third base, and he was the defensive player at third base. It's only an 8-team league. You know, that can be overblown. He goes to Akron, does the same thing. Best third baseman in the league. A few more teams in Double-A there. He goes to Triple-A, and that's when they started yanking him around in the outfield. And somewhere during that year is when he came up and Francona made his first statements about how he's not a good defender at third base. I guess my point here is this. Regardless of what we think about Yandy Diaz, defender at third base, playing in the outfield, as long as Terry Francona doesn't think he can play either position, which is scary. I mean, it's scary in that to bump Jose out of third, Yandy's got to do something to make him think he can play third, but I don't know that he's ever going to get a chance to do that. No. So I guess my question to you is this. I mean, are we at a spot now where we just sort of let Yandy go until we figure out what they do in the outfield? Because my guess here is Yandy Diaz is not going to get any time in the field with the Indians unless they can't pull the trigger on an outfielder.
Or if somebody gets hurt.
The only upside I see to Yandy Diaz is that they let Urshela go. But he didn't have any options. I think they just kind of played I think maybe the front office just kind of played their percentages there.
Yeah, and I don't know if they just view him as a DH, which is scary in its own right, because as much as I love his bat, he doesn't have a DH bat.
Dude, there's nothing wrong with 98-mile-an-hour ground balls. Come on.
If he could get the ball in the air, then he's a perfect DH bat. But you got to be a plus bat at DH, and maybe they're trying to hang on and use him there next year when next year Edwin's still here next year.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. They got to hold on to him until the year after next, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because in theory, then you have Bradley ready to go, could be a DH, but.
And if you're going to do that, you're not burning his option to play DH in Texas for a game.
I mean, okay, so let's just so they burn the option, not because they plan on using him later in the year. They burn the option because they just don't give a shit about Yandy Diaz, right?
Right. That's the only explanation here. I mean, they burned his option in late July. I don't care if you want to bring him up to DH in a weekend series in April. You're probably going to use him after that. I mean, but you got 40 days from now until the rosters expand when you don't have to. It's not the first time this year they've done the burned option thing either, is it?
Well, no, they did it. They did it with Mejia, and I think that was message sent, but I don't know. I guess the disconnect for me is, when you have a manager who makes a comment in spring training that says Yandy Diaz his bat's ready. We just need to get him 5 or 6. We just need him to have 500 or 600 more major league at bats.
But here's the catch: he doesn't have a position.
But we don't have a position for him to play. I mean, I guess my thinking here is this: like, why? I mean, is it that bad in the organization that a manager can see him a year and a half ago look like ass in Toronto, and them just go, yeah, we're not even going to try him out there in the minors?
We keep going back to that Toronto thing. That's my anecdotal frame of reference.
No. Well, the funny, you know how I am on Yandy, and I had putting that out of my mind. And the minute you said that, I remember that game well because I think I shut it off so I didn't have to watch it. But no, I mean, I think these are the types of things, as you mentioned, that stand out. I mean, when you listen to him talk about, he kind of said the same thing. His heart's not in the outfield. When they talked to Mejia about it, he had no idea what Francona was talking about because everything seemed to be going well to him. But I mean, I don't know. I don't want to come off as hammering Francona. I'm sure we're going to be hitting on that.
And this kind of brings me to my other thing as we talk about moving Jose around. I feel like the Indians are Jose Ramirez is the MVP in the American League right now, and I feel like the Indians are punting some of his value every day by keeping Eric Gonzalez on the roster. Yeah,
Hattery and I a couple years ago talked about the flex value of Jose Ramirez. I know you guys have talked about it. I know the three of us have talked about it. Here's where I'm at. I mean, I've watched Jose Ramirez over this past year, and I'm telling you, in the minors, Jose Ramirez at second base was something to behold. I will never forget a spring training game. The first time in a big league uniform, I saw Lindor and Ramirez playing shortstop and second base in a spring training game that meant nothing. And they made this play that made me think of Vizquel and Alomar. And this was 4 years ago.
Right.
That being said, Gage, I've watched Ramirez at third base. And I've looked at our third base situation over the past 20 years. If you stop and think about it, you can make a case right now that Jose Ramirez defensively top 4, maybe better at third base. So I ask you, is he better at second base at this point? Because he hasn't played second this year.
Well, I kind of view him as not only being flexible, but being very good flexible defensively. We saw his outfield experiment, and even then, he started to hold his own out there.
His routes were terrible, but his malleability to fix those routes in a split second were insane.
If you want to talk about instincts anywhere on a baseball player, I don't know if there's any that compare to Jose Ramirez. I mean, that's probably a little bit of a little hyperbolic, but
is it? Because because listen. I mean, you want to let's mention Ramirez. Let's mention Manny Ramirez, and I'm not going to compare the two offensively yet, but we talked about Manny Ramirez offensively over his entire career, PEDs notwithstanding, as being sort of this, just guy offensively that just woke up and could hit. You look at Jose Ramirez offensively, you look at Jose Ramirez defensively, every single place he's played, and he just sort of gets it. Yes. And I don't know that we've seen a player, and I'm a lot older than you, Gage. I'm 20 years older than you. I don't know that I've seen a player in a Cleveland Indians uniform that malleable to the point where you can say probably an all-star at second base, definitely an all-star at third base. And who knows in the outfield? I mean, he didn't look great out there just because, like I said, his first step off of those routes looked kind of ridiculous. Looked like we did when we played Little League. But his closing speed, his ability to get to a ball, his fearlessness, he just kind of gets it.
Yeah, so based on those instincts, I have no problem moving him around like crazy. And can I kind of say something here? Like, you see people say, let's keep him where he's comfortable. Let's keep him where this guy's bounced around his whole career. Yeah. I don't think he has a problem going and playing second base a couple days, and I don't think it's going to mess him up at the plate. But that's just me.
I think he kind of probably likes moving around. I mean, I don't know Jose Ramirez other than seeing him a few times in a dugout, covering the teams that I've covered over the years. But I mean, there's never, do you get the impression that there's anything, I mean, you take away probably the 2 months that he played shortstop that first year after he got called up in that 2013 year. He started at shortstop in 2014. He never looked right. Part of it was probably the fact that everybody knew Lindor was going to be coming up in June. He didn't have a swagger. It seemed like at the end of that season, when he flipped that bat with Paul Molitor, it just seemed like everything changed. And it probably changed a little bit before that. But this is a guy, Jose Ramirez, swagger-wise, to me, and I mean, we like to measure things in numbers, but if there's anybody who's got the intangibles, it's Jose Ramirez to play multiple positions.
Do you ever see him get down about something for an extent? Like, just watch his expressions and watch. He'll be upset. You can tell he's competitive as hell, and he'll be upset, but you can see it never affects him. He's got this little, like, everything brushes off his shoulder, which is maybe my favorite characteristic about him. Maybe it's a swagger since the legendary bat flip against the Twins.
I'll bring that up in every podcast.
Well, it's maybe the best Indians moment because you pissed off the two most bitter cronks in the AL Central. Paul Molitor and Joe Mauer. And getting them with one little flip is just one of my favorite things of any Indian season the past few years. Anytime you can piss off the cranky veteran guys, I'm all for it.
And if that veteran guy happens to be Paul Molitor, more power to him. All right, I'm just going to make the call now. I mean, I don't think they're moving. I don't think they're moving Jose Ramirez. I think the one way that gets him out of third, and I think they kind of left the door open. Francona was asked this week about the potential for Kipnis playing in the outfield, and I think the comment he made was he wouldn't do it unless he was compelled to do it. I think that led me to believe they had talked about it and said maybe this is the scenario. I think the scenario is probably, did we or did we not get an outfielder? So let's talk.
If you get a Adrian Beltre rental.
Yeah, well, and which I think is possible. So let's look forward a little bit, Gage. I think probably the best bet for us since the deadline. I don't even know what today's day is. The 24th today. We got
25th. We're pushing 6 days.
We got 6 days, so I'm sure you and I will probably be talking again in the next 6 days. But looking forward, and you and I have talked about this a lot, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder. You've come up with a name I think that's valid, but I want to kind of open the forum not just to one specific name, but if you were to target somebody and you're the Indians looking for the outfield and looking at the teams that might be selling, what are some guys out there that are probably being discussed right now in the Indians front office, and B, should be discussed in the Indians front office? Well,
the ultimate dream is Michael Conforto with the Mets, because he's just he's the all-star caliber potential. Last year he was in the MVP race for a while. The Mets are such a dumpster fire that they might feel compelled to try to build something up down there. And so he's like the dream scenario for me, but it doesn't seem that likely. So there is a realistic option out there on the Marlins. A Northeast Ohio kid himself, Derek Dietrich.
Yeah, so you haven't been on Twitter, and the bonus of that for me is that everything you say I can say, and it sounds like I said it. So I've been pushing the Derek Dietrich on Twitter. I think I may have referenced you once, maybe a week ago. Now it's me.
Well.
But okay. So if you're listening to this, everybody, Dietrich did not come from Jim Pete. Dietrich came from Gage Will, and I'm going to run with Dietrich. Obviously, defensively, he's not the guy we're looking for. Talk about his offense.
Well, yeah. Well, first, defensively, he's not really much of an outfielder. I mean, he's mostly an infielder who's played a little bit of outfield. But I mean, is Melky Cabrera an outfielder? Never mind. So. Offensively, he's not your shoot through the moon. Like, he's not your high walk guy or your redeeming skill guy that you can bet on making a huge jump somewhere. But he's been consistently plus. That's just maybe he's just very stable to me offensively. He's not going to be your. I mean, we're usually talking concrete numbers, but he's going to be an above average from a WRC plus standpoint. And he can kind of hit both sides of the plate. If I remember looking at his splits correctly, he can kind of hit against both sides, both lefties and righties. So there's just something little interesting to me about stable on a team that doesn't have anything stable in the outfield.
And he's, I think control wise, we're looking at 2.5 years, or is it?
Through 2021, I think.
Yeah. So I've got it pulled up right here. Let me take a quick look. I know it's multiple years. You know what? It's it looks like here leave 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like he's 1.5. It looks like he's end of 2019. Next year's his last.
Okay, so it's not an extended control guy, but. For me, when you got guys like Rajai and Melky playing the majority of a lot of innings out there, and it's just one of your average filler players that holds a lot of value to this Indians club because they can't find the average filler players at the bottom of their lineup in 2018.
Can I just say if everybody listening to this would go back and listen to you and Hattery's corner of hot takes talking about the outfield. And then fast forward to today, where we're looking at Melky Cabrera is our full-time. He's not platooning. I mean, he is.
No, and you can come at me for this one because I mentioned it to Hattery, I think, in one of those podcasts. Hey, maybe they should look at Melky Cabrera and take a flyer on him.
I mean, I guess in the if you want to step back, and I'm gonna, because I could really walk down the mountain. I've been carrying this flame on Twitter, which you of course can't see because you're not on anymore, but I've been running at people with this milk because there's actually a contingent of Melky Cabrera people out there. But so I'm just stepping back from all this. You know what? If they're going to use Melky Cabrera for a week or two, great, fine. I don't care. That's fine. Do it. As long as Melky Cabrera isn't it like a game 5 in the ALDS. As long as Melky Cabrera isn't on the playoff roster, fine. Put him out there.
No. I'm stopping you. I disagree. I'm. You have an 8-game lead in the Central, and you haven't been good. You have room to experiment. You shouldn't be experimenting with 37-year-old ceiling average guys. I don't care how poorly Greg Allen has hit. I don't care if Yandy Diaz is chasing butterflies in right field. You get somebody up there that maybe has a little bit of upside.
Well, and this leads me back to the Yandy thing. Like, I mean, listen, when they had Mejia, they weren't going to use him in the outfield because he didn't have heart. What is that? Okay.
Well, we got to back off that train.
Okay.
The oldest outfield in the majors, and also the most ineffective outfield in the majors, probably.
Well, so you mentioned Derek Dietrich. I think another guy out there, maybe with a little more value, will cost us a little bit more. And this, I got this in a conversation with Fangraphs and Athletics, Travis Sawchik. Scooter Gennett for Scooter Gennett for Cincinnati has played very well since the Indians picked him up since the Reds picked him up off the trash heap, really, from Milwaukee.
He hit 4 home runs one night last year.
Yeah, I mean, and now here's the thing, Dietrich is in this category, Gennett is in this category. I mean, again, he's an infielder. He played a little bit in the outfield last year. I mean, throwing him out there would be sort of like throwing Kipnis out there, although I think Gennett probably can play a little bit better in the outfield. But here's my question. Like, I mean, are these guys even available? They should be available. But the Marlins, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
Here's what will play to the Gennett thing with me. The Indians deal with known entities, and they've always done this organizationally. Not saying they don't reach outside the pot, but they've made several deals with the Padres, with the Diamondbacks, and with the Reds. Like there's just kind of that, in the Blue Jays. It's just kind of like there are a few clubs where the Indians are comfortable dealing with. So that plays into the Gennett thing for me because they're very familiar and comfortable with the Reds.
Gennett sort of screams Terry Francona to me too. I mean, he seems to be a Francona blue collar kind of guy, but beyond that, I think with the Reds, you'd also be looking at a potential maybe throw in, and I don't mean to say the word throw in, but if you're talking to the Reds, you're probably going to be talking bullpen. I mean, you got Iglesias there, and you've got Garrett there, another lefty. I mean, I guess when you're talking a deal for Dietrich, you're probably talking what?
Well, here's the thing with the Reds, though. Ever since they fired Brian Price, and I think it's more coincidence than anything. I'm not a big firm believer in managers having this, but Jim Riggleman, I think it was, took over, and they've been a pretty good ball club since then. They have a lot. I think they had 4 All-Stars. They have a lot of power in that lineup. So before we get to talking about their relievers, I think they might have moved their window up a little bit, and I'm not sure they want to trade an Iglesias.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I don't know that I mean, I don't know that this is the year that they want to trade Jeanette either. I mean, I look at him and you've got Votto on that team. I mean, you want to maybe take a run next year, maybe make a couple of moves in the offseason.
Well, here's where I think it gets interesting with the Reds. They have a logjam of outfielders. And maybe Billy Hamilton, you probably couldn't sell me on. He just doesn't. You can't hit worth a lick. You just don't have much value, even if you're stealing every base. But they have Scott Schebler.
But I'll say this about Billy Hamilton. I mean, obviously, he's not probably top 10 on my list. But you make a trade for Billy Hamilton, and you can at least, with some sense, see him at the bottom of our order doing something, or at the very least, not looking at our outfield now because he would be a starter, obviously, but in a perfect world, if you maybe get another outfielder with Billy Hamilton, he at least becomes a really interesting fourth guy out there because you start pinch running him in the playoffs where those pinch running opportunities become really valuable. You can sell me on Billy Hamilton. It just depends on what you're giving up.
You could sell me there, but I want to get to the point. They have a corner outfield logjam. They have Scott Schebler who can hit the cover off the ball. And if they were willing to part with him, I would give up the moon for him.
And I think we talked about him when the Indians were playing the Reds a couple weeks ago.
And I think he tore the Indians a new one in one of those games.
He did, yeah.
But moving on from Schebler, who's got a couple more years of control after this year, or I think 4 maybe. Then they have their prospect, Jesse Winker, who needs playing time because he's hitting the cover off the ball. And they have the kind of outside cast Adam Duvall. So I think there is a path to a Reds corner outfield like Duvall and Garrett out of the bullpen, just because those pieces maybe don't help the Reds a ton in the window that they... I think it would make sense for the Reds to deal one of their corner outfielders and one of Iglesias or Garrett. That's just...
But I mean, you're looking at any one of those guys with Garrett. Let's just say Garrett.
Yeah.
A lefty. I go back and forth on how much I like him. A lot of control there. But you look at any one of the guys you just mentioned. Most of those guys. I mean, you're immediately talking McKenzie.
Maybe not Duvall, but Schebler.
Duvall was the one. Yeah.
Duvall is the guy that maybe seems the most attainable to me because I think he only has one more year of control after this year. And you could see a scenario where the Reds want to, and he just really doesn't have any. He's got some he kind of reminds me of like a Jay Bruce type in that he can go supernova for a month. But if you're talking Schebler or Winker, you're talking McKenzie plus Nolan Jones probably, and then more.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm fine with that on the right deal. I mean, if they're bringing in a reliever with a lot of years of control that I buy into for a lot of years, I'm fine dealing McKenzie. I'm looking at this window is the next 3 years. I think having McKenzie, if he pans out, if McKenzie pans out, he's coming to the Indians sometime mid next year, 2020. And let's be honest, 2020 is the last year of Bauer's deal. We're heading towards the end of the Kluber run, of the Carrasco run, and who knows how much gas they have in the tank past, say, next year. Obviously, Lindor's tank is going to be empty then. We're going to be in the midst of the J-Ram deal, so that who knows what they're going to be doing there in like 2021, 2022. I mean, let's be realistic. McKenzie is their most dealable asset because, honestly, they're probably looking more at those young guys in the Arizona League right now, the Nolan Joneses of the world in low A.
Valera, and
I mean, they're looking at those guys as the next window to maybe come up in 2022, 2023, and start building up towards another run. McKenzie, I mean, if they keep him, great. I mean, we were going to he'll probably fit somewhere in the rotation at some point, maybe in the bullpen to start. Okay. So, but dealing McKenzie, I'm fine with. Is there really an outfielder that you right now say, we got to go after him. We got to go get him. And I'm going to throw – the Indians have been mostly tied to Adam Jones. And I don't know how Adam Jones 5 years ago, Adam Jones today, two totally different things. I'm going to mention two guys to you that we've talked to. Adam Jones is one. I think another guy that's in a similar area just because of age. I think at one point, being flamboyant center fielders, they probably were very similar 5 years ago, 4 years ago. We talked about this as Andrew McCutchen as well with the Giants. And again, this really isn't a McKenzie deal, but these guys in the last years of their contracts, McCutchen 2 straight years has been kind of one of those names that have been rumbled about with the Indians. Can't imagine he's going to cost a lot. Can't imagine Adam Jones is going to cost a lot. Talk about both. I mean, I know who you'd prefer, but
it's not really that head and shoulders either way. They're very similar. They're like league average output hitting types at this point. And all I can say about each one of them is their respective teams better be eating some salary, because you can't sell me on Adam Jones for $8 million. And I'm usually not even in the window like a money guy, but if you're going to spend $8 million on Adam Jones, why couldn't you have added a reliever in this past winter? But I don't want to digress. They're both serviceable. I would rather see both of them in center field, even if they're not great center fielders anymore, than Rajai Davis or Tyler Naquin. I can say that with a degree of confidence. I think you feel the same way.
Yeah, look, I think McCutchen is probably a 10 to 15, maybe a 10 to 20 guy in our prospect list. Maybe maybe the Giants have a lottery pick they have their eye on in our organization somewhere down there that they might want us to throw a deal for. Adam Jones to me, he's a guy. You find him a body. The only thing for me, you're looking at, at least with Adam Jones, league average right now, McCutchen's not much above that. But, I guess the only concern I have about these two guys is with a lot of teams looking for outfielders, we could see a price go up here. I don't know. That's the one.
I kind of thought that with Jay Bruce last year, though, too. And maybe Baltimore is just very eager about getting rid of that salary, so it turns into something where the Indians say, "Hey, we'll pay you, and then you can have Ryder Ryan."
Well, yeah, the nice thing about where the Indians are at is being that they're the worst first place team. They're kind of the guardians of that waiver wire with those first place teams. And if Adam Jones slides into that waiver period, I think he's a no brainer.
I think he will. I don't think he just seems like the prime waiver wire deal this year, because nobody wants to pay him $8 million for the rest of the year.
Well, and someone mentioned to me something really interesting. And again, I hate saying stuff like this, but can you imagine what it's like to play in Baltimore? You bring a guy from Baltimore to Cleveland. Someone mentioned this on Twitter today to me. There could be a bump. And I'm not usually a guy that goes, well, he's a field bump, so yeah, he's going to be great. But I have to imagine when you play in Baltimore your entire career, especially the past 2 or 3 there, moving to a team that's automatically in the playoffs, maybe energizes him a little bit. Maybe, but
you'd have you have the pessimistic version of me on the other side saying maybe the bright lights. I don't know. He hasn't played under the bright lights in a while. I don't like getting into the maybe he could be. Maybe this bump could happen.
Just thank your lucky stars you're not on Twitter, because I posted the diminishing return of his past 6 years, and almost every single statistic has gone down pretty consistently from 6 years since years ago on, when he was a 5-WAR guy to a.
I will say this about Adam Jones, though. He's always seemed like a very intuitive guy who has made conscious adjustments throughout his career. And I know I was reading an article about him when the rumors first started popping up. And right when Buck Showalter was coming on, they were trying to sign Adam Jones to an extension. And he barged into Buck Showalter's office and said, "Hey, what's the plan here?" before he signed that extension. And I kind of like that kind of thing. Like, that it kind of endears me to players when they want to be involved, when they want to know what they're signing and getting into. and kind of take ownership of their situation. So there are some redeeming qualities to Adam Jones that you could sell me on, and maybe there's some regression to the mean that's a safe bet, or positive regression in his favor that's a safe bet coming down the pipe.
Well, I mean, in many ways, kind of the guy there in Baltimore. Here in Cleveland, I mean, he's going to be hitting like 8th. You know, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes taking away the stress. All right, let's slowly wrap things up here. I do want to mention one more thing before we get out of here, though, because you know, this is the first time we've talked since the season has started on this podcast, and I just want to get this out because it's been pissing me off all year, and I just want to say this right now. You know, the Indians are in I mean, they're the one division that's a lock. You know, I mean, they're going to make the playoffs, and if they don't, people need to be there should be a whole lot of firing going on, but that's neither here nor there. How concerned are you? And I mean, you know, I've watched sports a long time. I get really worried about teams that are sort of lax throughout the year because there's nothing really pushing.
Like the 2016 Cavs?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you know, you can look at a team like the Indians who have this, I mean, they've got 3 guys in the running for the MVP. They have legitimately, well, probably 1 guy in the running for the Cy Young, but you never know how the second half's going to go. Maybe 3 guys in there. I don't know. Probably 2 for sure. You're looking at, and then you have, you know, the potential of Andrew Miller and Cody Allen. You have these elite players. But you have this team that just seems to tread water. And I know everybody's pointing to last year, Gage. Oh, they're only a game behind what they were last year. But Gage, they went on a historic 22-game winning streak, and they won 102 games, and they got bounced out of the playoffs.
The playoffs are a different beast. I can't. It's hard for me to get worked up about the happenings of this season so far, even though there is a lot to ramble on.
Well, I don't want to bitch about the season. I mean, we can talk about the different gears that Terry Francona has. We can talk about how he manages in the first month compared to the last month, whatever. But I mean, is there any concern? And I know we talk about variance in the playoffs. The team was a 102-game winner. The team was favored to beat the Yankees by everybody except for people who are in the media. I mean, are you not a little bit concerned that their motor just isn't kicking in? I mean, do you worry that they get into the playoffs and the rotation's burned out a little bit from the first half usage and Andrew Miller's just not right and maybe they don't get an outfielder? I don't know. I mean,
I guess my concerns with the Indians are more about 2019 and 2020 with their pitching. And I've just kind of stopped worrying about the playoffs are going to be a bear. There are 3 loaded teams in the American League that you're going to have to beat 2 of them to get anywhere. And that's just kind of almost a guarantee at this point, unless Oakland or Seattle goes on some magical run out of the wild card spot. But
yeah.
So I think the Indians aren't on their level right now in the regular season. I'm talking about the Red Sox, Yankees, and Astros. But I also don't think any one of those teams wants to play the Indians. And I think from a pitching standpoint, none of them have, even with the Yankees' loaded bullpen, if everybody's right on the Indians, and that's my biggest concern, if everybody's right, there's no pitching staff in baseball that is better suited for October with this hand acquisition now. And I am 100% confident of that.
How pissed are you going to be when Shane Bieber starts game 1?
Oh, we're gonna give Shane Bieber a game 1 start, and then we're gonna really throw him off when we throw Adam Plutko in game 2 for 2 innings.
The fun thing about this is if we keep podcasting. I mean, I think the fun part about August and September is as we start lining this team up, especially once they're complete, once they stop making moves. And I think we're going to see the Indians I think they got 2 or 3 more moves in them, unless they make another big move with 2 or 3 players involved. The fun part is once we get everybody back, and they've handled Miller correctly, they're taking their time with him. Is as we get through August, I think you can start lining this team up for the playoffs. And if the bullpen's right, if Andrew Miller's right, and you've got 4 guys, and I don't know I'm not ready to throw Cimber in there. If you've got your back end 3 guys healthy, and Kluber still, even the Kluber that's going right now, that's clearly hurt, but even that Kluber right now, with Carrasco of right now, and Trevor Bauer, who right now is the ace of the team, and whoever you want to put in there at 4, and you got to say Clevenger right now, but maybe it's Bieber, Clevenger, Bieber, and then whoever else, that adds another arm into the pen. I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if you take the offense off the table, and that means we're taking J-Ram off the table and Lindor off the table, just that pitching alone, if our rotation gets to 6, we're in every game.
Yes. And I think that's why I'm most focused on offense and maybe one more bullpen move over the next week. But the one more bullpen move is purely 2019 and 2020 related to me. I don't know if it's unless Miller's not right.
Unless Miller's not right, and you can't wait.
No. And
well, I mean, you can't. You've got 6. I mean, you got 5 weeks. I mean, you can wait 5 weeks. I mean, if Miller's not back in 5 weeks, you better have made another move. But even without Miller, you still have a serviceable back end, more than serviceable back end, unless you're the worrywarts that think Cody Allen's done.
And I'm not. I think we've just seen a little bump in the road, and I think all of a sudden Cody's going to be striking out 15 people per 9 innings again in September.
I mean, he seems to have this period every single year where he kind of goes down, he dips a little bit, and then he comes back out of it.
I would love to get into this too, because I think it's always in the same like doldrums, like June, July, where he just leaves everything up a little bit. And I do think he will get right and click. I'm not really even worried about Cody Allen at all. The Andrew Miller thing, and even without him, I think mostly looking at 2019 and 2020 when I'm talking about adding another pen arm.
So can I ask you whether you think Michael Brantley's going to be healthy in October, or should I just end the podcast right now?
Oh, I don't want to piss anybody off. No, I'm just kidding.
No, don't answer that. No,
I'm really happy with Michael Brantley this year.
Yeah.
I really hope to God he stays healthy, because he is a necessity now.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's fun. I mean, we've said it from the start, and I mean, if anybody's been harsh on Michael Brantley, it's been really us. But me specifically, I pretty much guaranteed he'd be out by now. But I mean, I think all of us, understand the value of Michael Brantley. I mean, Michael Brantley is. Go ahead.
Is this where I dropped the bomb that he's basically been an average hitter for 2 months?
Well, yeah, no. I mean, you threw that at me, I think last night or maybe the night before in Slack. He has been.
That's okay, though. I mean,
I think an average bat in between the 2 guys he's hitting in between, kind of okay. Be nice to have it'd be nice to have a lead, Brantley, but that's beside the point. All right, let's wrap things up there. We got the dust off the covers. Gage and I will try to keep doing these things. I don't know where Hattery stands. As we mentioned before, Hattery's hopefully sleeping right now, getting ready for day 3 of the bar. I know he's been wanting to pod too over the past few weeks, just hasn't had the time. Things should open up over the next couple of days, though. So we'll try to we dusted the car, a little rusty today, but we'll slowly start grooving into this thing as we head towards the deadline of the playoffs. Gage, tell me about the piece you threw out this week.
I just touched on Shane Bieber, who, of course, after I touched on him, he got touched up pretty good. But no, I kind of talked about how I'm in love with the way he uses his curveballs and sliders against righties and lefties. And his plus command plays right into the curveball and slider, because he can drift them right out of the bottom of the zone and make them look like strikes for 99% of the route to the plate. So I touched on Shane Bieber, and I think there's a lot exciting there. And I'm kind of working towards waiting for something to happen with the trade market before I dive into something else. But
well, and you definitely touched upon potential suitors, especially for the bullpen. I know, and you talked about, if I remember right, you talked about the Marlins.
Yeah, and I mentioned Adam Conley, who I think was linked to the Indians this afternoon.
He was linked to the Indians this afternoon. Another lefty. I mean, are we trying to roll out an all lefty bullpen?
Hey, I don't care. Just get guys out.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, Conley was mentioned, and I think.
So, little tidbit: Conley, failed starter, turned reliever. First relief year, he's added 5 miles per hour to his fastball, and all of a sudden, everybody's whiffing. So there's just something really exciting about there. That's the brief synopsis.
I'll throw the link onto when you guys have read, if you've read this on the site or if you've read this on our podcast site, I'll throw the link on there to his piece connecting him to the Marlins. We'll throw up some stuff over the next few days, heading towards the trade deadline. And once we get to the deadline, if any moves are made, I'm sure Gage, Hattery, me, maybe 2 of us, 3 of us, 12 of us, I don't know. We'll probably all be on here talking about it. So thanks for joining us.
Go read Jim Pete's Brad Hand and Adam Cimber piece, by the way. That was fantastic. 4,000 words is all you could ever ask for on those two.
Well, yeah. I think the biggest thing that struck me having written that piece is that Brad Hand has been developing. I like guys. I like guys who, he's a guy who's a 5-pitch pitcher who's turned into a 4-pitch pitcher. Now is a 3-pitch pitcher, slowly kind of molding himself into an Andrew Miller-like pitcher. I don't know if that's on purpose. The fun thing for me is over these next 2.5 months, having Brad Hand and Andrew Miller in the same dugout, which can't hurt Brad Hand for the next 2.5 years. 3.5 years with the Indians. So make sure you give that a read. We got a lot of stuff coming out. I got a J-Ram piece sort of sitting around. All right, here's my interesting thing about J-Ram. He's right now 32nd all-time in FWAR. He's got 2.5 months left. That's all I'm going to say about that. So be on the lookout for my J-Ram piece. Hopefully I'll take a slant no one else is taking. All right. Gage, we did it, man.
Adios.
I'll see you in 2019.
Yes. When the Indians find an outfielder.
Oh, yeah, right. Like we haven't been talking about outfielders